Hello, everyone. Welcome to Grid Live. We have the full house here. Toby, myself, Joe. We have Vin, Jackson, Alex, and Isha. Link in the video description to all their channels. And we want to give a big thank you to all of our Patreon subscribers, Colin the Show, Mark, Robin, and David. Thank you so much. Our newest one, Matthew, as well. All of them getting these nice Grid Network stickers. If you want some, sign up, invest in the Grid Network. Link in the video description. And of course, you want to do a one-time investment contribution or buy a cup of coffee for any one of the Grid Network team members. Do that through Buy Me a Coffee or even the YouTube chat. Just mention in the chat room who's going for it, and we will forward it to them. And I see already we got a very excited Dylan in the chat room because what a big day of racing we had, Alex.
Yeah.
We got to start with Formula One. Very exciting. Well, first lap, first corner, and then I think the rest sort of became what we might call a Max Verstappen rerun.
Yeah, that's right, Joe. Formula One, they had a dramatic start with Max Verstappen taking the lead into turn one, while his teammate Sergio Perez crashed out over in turn one. And the pressure is adding up on Perez as he was outqualified by Daniel Ricciardo, the main driver rumored to possibly replace him if he loses second place. Perez's competitor for second overall is Lewis Hamilton, who finished today's race in second, which brings the fight for second much closer. Ricciardo, meanwhile, finished seventh for AlphaTauri. So focusing on the first corner incident, Isha, let's start with you. Is it fair to blame this first corner crash on Perez, or is it not?
In my opinion, I feel like it is, because when you look at those front three, right, we had Sergio Perez on the left, and then on his inside was Charles Leclerc, and then on his inside was Max Verstappen. And, some people were blaming Charles Leclerc, but if he had moved any further to the right, he could have risked a collision with Max Verstappen, right? So Checo was the last one to join that front three-line pack, so I feel like he's the one who could have pulled out. Um, and in my opinion, I feel like he got too excited or eager considering that was his home Grand Prix, and he risked too much because at the end of the day, he's the one who had the biggest loss. So, I feel like he is the one to blame for it.
Yeah, nailed it on the head there, Isha. And I feel like when we see those kind of three wide incidents, I think the guy in the middle is usually the guy that's the majority of the blame. What is he doing there? But we got to realize Checo was the last guy to that party into turn one, was the guy that went deepest on the brakes and the first guy to turn in despite having the longest line around the outside. This is for sure like worst case scenario for Checo with everything going on with the Red Bull contract. And obviously this being his home race, but yeah, Joe, Alex, it's something I totally didn't want to see, but I gotta blame it on Checo.
That's fair to me. And now on lap 35, it looked like everything could change when Kevin Magnussen crashed hard into the barriers. The incident brought out a red flag and a restart. On the restart, Max led Leclerc and Hamilton, and with a great restart. This allowed Max Verstappen to pull ahead and win the Mexico City Grand Prix and clinch the 2023 Grid Ranking World Championship. So Jackson, should we expect Verstappen to just continue and dominate Brazil next weekend?
Yeah, like, is that not what he's done every single race this year? Right? Like, as much as I want to say, oh, maybe the Ferraris have a good chance, we thought the Ferraris had a good chance today in turn one. Hopes and dreams out the window of anyone that's not Max Verstappen. And I think the only thing we can do at this point in the championship is just hope for cartoon anvils to fall on these guys. Like, that is our only hope. Isha, what do you think? Because I want to think otherwise, but I'm not liking my odds.
Yeah, not much more to add to that. I think you said it pretty well. He's definitely going to dominate Brazil next weekend. The past two Brazilian GPs were Mercedes wins, right? But obviously with Max Verstappen's performance, it's going to be him. We might see the Mercedes have a double podium, definitely at least one of the cars on the podium, but it's definitely going to be a win for Max.
I know Perez wishes one of those cartoon anvils would fall on his teammate instead of him for once.
Yeah.
I'm sure he would wish for that. But now moving on, we have Lando Norris. He had a drive from 19th to 5th today, and he showed a lot of pace from his McLaren. McLaren was set to get away from Aston Martin, and Lando said in the post-race show that they would be on the podium. So could Mercedes and Ferrari be looking at McLaren to be a contender with to be best of the rest next year against Red Bull? Isha, what do you think?
Definitely. I definitely think so. Even now we've seen that the top 4 teams to look out for are the Mercedes, Ferrari, McLaren, and Red Bulls. And I think that next year, once the drivers have more practice with this car for the McLaren, and once they're more comfortable with it, I think they're definitely going to be dominating the season. And I think Ferrari and Mercedes should definitely be looking out for them as well.
Theme of the last 2 races, guys, both Mexico City and Sao Paulo, high altitude. Brazil was the highest altitude race of the calendar up until Mexico City came along, but these 2 by a huge margin are the highest on the calendar. And what that means is cars have less air to push them down into the ground. They have less air to breathe, and they're making less power. Who's been the best in these high altitude conditions? I mean, obviously it's Red Bull, but when we're looking at second best right now, it is Ferrari kind of edging out the McLarens. And I really struggle to see McLaren kind of continuing that momentum that we saw a little bit earlier in the season. I really do think it's going to be Ferraris to take.
And thanks everyone for all those comments in the chat room. I saw Adam comment that we had, Perez and Hamilton are only 20 points apart now. So that is getting pretty close. And they both have their issues the past race with Hamilton's disqualification and then Perez today. And no more Verstappen.
Verstappen. Maz Verstappen.
You might need that. Maz Verstappen. We should call him Maz. I like that. But anyway, let's move on here. As we mentioned earlier, Lewis Hamilton finished second and thanked the team for the strong car this weekend. He is coming to Brazil, one of his favorite tracks, a race George Russell won last year. Russell's only podium was third in Spain, and since Singapore, their best finish was fourth in Qatar. So Jackson, does Mercedes feel good about coming to Brazil, and could they potentially get a double podium?
I mean, we go back to last year. It's a track that not only their cars are good at, but both of the drivers are fantastic at. George has always been good there, even in his William days. We go back to 2008 with Hamilton and that iconic last lap there. And I think it really is Mercedes for a double podium, absolutely. And as we were talking about, if the right things happen, I think we could absolutely see a very long-awaited win for Lewis Hamilton, or perhaps a repeat for Russell. Isha.
Yeah, I totally agree with Jackson here. Mercedes definitely should be feeling good coming into the race, not just because they have history at these tracks and that they've won the past 2 seasons, but also because the past few races they've been doing a great job as well. And as Jackson pointed out, I think that this could be the biggest chance Lewis Hamilton could have at winning the race, And otherwise, if it's not him, it could be George Russell, unless, Max Verstappen takes the win again. But otherwise, I think that Mercedes, it's definitely going to be a good weekend for them, and they're definitely going to have at least one of the cars, if not both, on the podium.
And ADub427 here thinks that Mercedes is a little bit better than Ferrari at the moment, opposing what you said there, Jackson. Do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, well, we talk about like the Hamilton fans and the Mercedes guys. Oh my gosh, I don't know.
You made Jackson freeze. Like,
yeah, God.
What's going on, Jackson?
I'm good. Sorry, I had a Mercedes moment, but we think about how much the Mercedes fans have been wanting success here in the past couple of years, and what they've had for so long, and since this new era of Red Bull domination, that's all been chopped off, and the last real taste Mercedes has had of that is exactly a year ago, and I think we really, really want to see that again. And I think that's kind of where ADub 427 was coming from. But yeah, for sure want to see some more balance for everyone up front.
For sure. Totally agree there. And now moving on to Aston Martin. They had a big tumble this weekend, continuing their tumble with another double DNF. Carlos Sainz is now tied for fourth in the driver's standings with Fernando Alonso, and he has the tiebreaker with his Singapore win. So Isha, is this more of a case of Ferrari improving since Singapore, or mainly just because of Aston Martin's continued struggles?
Alex, I feel like this is a bit of a tricky question because while Ferrari has improved, Aston Martin has also Not improved. Looking at where they were at the start of the season, it's definitely gone downhill for them, not just for Lance Stroll, but also for Fernando Alonso. So I think that while Ferrari's improved, it's also a result of Aston Martin struggling quite more. So, I think it's a 50-50 situation here.
Yeah, you want to say that Ferrari is improving, but I mean, DNF for Alonso, Stroll outside of the top 15, and this is things we've seen, this gradual drop off of performance. And I think really what's happened is where Aston Martin was at the start of the season, that's where McLaren is filling in now and getting those kind of underdog podium spots. So as much as Ferrari is improving, we're going to study two things at the end of the season, and that's how McLaren has managed to work their way up to the front and just how Aston Martin has dropped off so much, guys.
For sure. And now we'll bring Kobe in to talk about some MotoGP.
Thanks, Alex. So in MotoGP, we saw a thriller three-way battle for the win in the last 10 laps. 7 lead changes between Pecco Bagnaia, Jorge Martin, and Brad Binder. Martin ended up taking the win and looked to have closed the gap to single digits, but a last lap track limit violation for Brad Binder gave Bagnaia second place, 4 points gained from third to second. And now bringing Joe in, if Jorge Martin ends up losing this championship by 4 points or less, is this going to be the moment that everyone is going to look back on and point to?
Everyone's going to be pointing the finger that this was the moment that race control intervened and influenced the championship. But I would disagree with that big time, because when you look at Martin's season, especially a couple races ago when he was leading, had over a 3-second lead and crashed out, that's one of the key moments in my opinion. We still have a lot of points on the line, a lot of racing, so it's far from over. So the 4-point difference, people are going to, if we have a situation where Martin lose by 3, 4, 2, or 1 point, people will point their finger at that, but I think that's really unfair because Martin, despite having his great, strong effort the last few races, overall, the mistakes earlier this year, that's going to be, I think, some of the costly mistakes that are going to come back and haunt him, including in Australia this last race weekend where the team went for the effort to go for the softer tires, to gamble. They came up 8 corners short of pulling off that win. I think it's a combination of various stuff, but overall, though, Martin, he is looking very hard to beat.
Yeah, for sure, hard to beat. And that was a very tough loss, lead the entire race, and then just lose it right there at the end. And there are 111 points on the line in these last 3 Grand Prix events. So it's still very much wide open between the two. As you were saying, Marco Bezzecchi is still mathematically eligible for the championship. Today, Pecco Bagnaia came from 6th and worked his way up to 3rd and put himself in contention for the win, trying an aggressive move with 2 laps to go while going for the lead. After today's race, do you see a clear advantage between Martin and Bagnaia?
After today's race, if this is the Pecco Bagnaia we're going to get each and every weekend, this is going to go down to the last race, last lap potentially. Because Pecco Bagnaia, this was a race I felt we hadn't seen in quite a while from him. Qualifying, still, 6th place, wasn't exactly on top of his game. So I anticipated he was going to probably be 3rd place, maybe 4th or 5th. But he put on a great drive to get towards 3rd place, and very smart, just letting Brad Binder, Jorge Martin battle out for the lead, try to use up their tires because tire management was a big issue. When it came to the final corner, and we saw Pecco Bagnaia put on that move to try to go for the lead, overtaking the 2 of them, if he could bring that kind of momentum, that kind of aggressiveness each and every week to Jorge Martin, I think those two, considering how great the 2 of them are riding right now, this will be one of the most fantastic battles we've seen in quite some time. And considering, Kobe, that it wasn't that long ago we were thinking this was going to be one of the most lopsided championship with Pecco Bagnaia getting an easy win of the championship. It has really heated up with a few remaining races, and I think everyone's going to be in for a very exciting final few rounds in MotoGP this year.
Yeah, Pecco Bagnaia definitely peaked way too soon. But like you're saying, it's really great to see this fun championship battle in MotoGP this year. And maybe it'll go down to the final race, last lap, last corner, and see who ends up on top, Bagnaia or Martinez. As you mentioned, Joe got 3 more races to go in the 2023 MotoGP season. That the next race is going to be on November 12th. That's going to be the Grand Prix of Malaysia. Then on 19th, Qatar, and then finishing up the season on November 26th in Valencia. And now we're going to turn it over to Isha to discuss the NASCAR Cup Series Round 8 playoffs elimination race at Martinsville Speedway.
Thank you, Kobe. Yes, so shifting gears over to NASCAR now. Yesterday on the pre-race show, Joe, you mentioned the situation that Ryan Blaney was in, the hardest of anyone entering the race. However, he made today look very easy and won the Xfinity 500 and got into the NASCAR playoffs. Now, William Byron got in by points for his first championship 4. However, Denny Hamlin, Martin Truex Jr., Tyler Reddick, and Chris Buescher were all eliminated. Ben, Alex, is Blaney a legitimate contender, and is Byron still one of the favorites?
Well, Byron is still certainly one of the favorites. He won this race in the spring, and he's won 6 races this year. I know he certainly didn't have the race that he wanted to have today, but I would still certainly consider him the favorite. I think any of the championship 4, to be honest, has a legitimate shot at it, including Ryan Blaney. He's riding a ton of momentum right now. Obviously, this is a massive win for him. He was very strong in the championship 4 race last year, despite not being in that position to fight for a title. Obviously, his teammate Joey Logano was the one that represented Team Penske and ended up winning the championship. But if Ryan Blaney executes like he did today, absolutely, he's got a chance of a championship next weekend in Phoenix.
Any of these 4 can win this championship. And that is so exciting to me because I don't know what's going to happen. There's been years before where I've been like, this is the guy who's going to go to Phoenix or Homestead when I was at Homestead, who's going to go and just win this race, like when Kyle Larson won in 2021, for example. But this is very open. I don't think we really have a favorite, but I do think we have arguably the most correct championship 4, even if we have Truex out, even if we have Denny Hamlin out, because these are from stats from a friend Avery Hage on X/Twitter. The most points scored in the playoffs were Byron, Bell, Larson, Blaney. The top 4. All 4 of them scored the most points throughout the playoffs. But if you want me to pick a contender who's the favorite, I gotta say it's Ryan Blaney. Maybe I'm biased, I don't know. But Ryan Blaney is riding momentum right now. This is also from Avery Hage. In the round of 16, Blaney scored 88 points. Round of 12, he scored 95. Round of 8, he scored 151. Blaney is picking up steam at the right time, and I think he's going to Phoenix. He probably could have won this race last year. This is a fantastic track for Blaney. And when you look at if you believe in momentum, I think Blaney is the guy you got to go with, but you can make a case for any of the 4 drivers.
I don't know why you think you're biased, Alex. I mean, it's not like you've got a couple of Team Penske banners hanging behind you or wearing a Ryan Blaney shirt right now.
I mean, it's hard to tell, right? I mean, I have a giant flag right in front of me. I mean, it's hard to say. I don't know.
Alex, thanks for bringing those stats up from your friend as well. And I believe we have some other comments in the chat room. So Tom says this is the most stream ever.
So true.
And he says, how do I invest in this epic organization? That is a great question. You know, we've got all the links to our different ways that you can contribute to the Grid Network. And, you know, you can see them all up on the screen here as well. So, you know, if you would like to, please, we would love and appreciate all the support we can get. Now, continuing with the segment. So, speaking of Ryan Blaney, he is going for a championship as the lone Ford. Chevrolet has a 50% chance at the championship, with Larson and Byron both in it. Christopher Bell represents Toyota, and Hamlin is again out before the championship 4. Now, Hamlin and Truex are both out, so does this come as a shock that neither of them made it? Alex, what do you think?
So Hamlin, yes, because like just a few weeks ago, I was on here saying he's probably the championship favorite, but look, they didn't execute at the right time. I think they might have peaked too early, perhaps, and they didn't make it. And I think he needed to win today or have William Byron just have bad luck. It didn't happen. And, you know, for him, that sucks. He's been in the situation so many times now throughout his career, still without a championship. He is the driver with most wins in NASCAR history without a championship. He hopes to not hold that stat forever. But that's Denny Hamlin. Martin Truex, this is not a surprise at all. Horrible, disastrous playoffs from the regular season champion. I don't know what went wrong. They just horrible. And then even today, they're running 3rd, and they got the pole 2 weeks in a row. They got it last week at Homestead as well. And then Truex speeds, and it's just downfall from there. It's just every week in these playoffs, something would happen to Truex. It was just like, what's going to happen to them? What mistake are they going to make? And once Truex sped on pit road, the team was having slow pit stops. They were just never able to improve, and he just stayed in the 20s the rest of the day. So Truex, I'm not surprised. Hamlin, I mean, it's just kind of his thing at this point.
Well, I'll tell you what happened, Alex. Martin Truex Jr., like yours truly, being from New Jersey, I'm from just south of Philly and Delaware. He's a Philly sports fan, as you can see from this tweet that I dug up from Dustin Long from way back in 2009. I know he's more vocal about his Eagles and Flyers, but he was seen wearing a Phillies cap, I guess, when was this, 13, 14 years ago here? Just like the Phillies did against the Diamondbacks earlier this week. He got to the playoffs and couldn't close the deal. It's fitting for Philadelphia sports and fans of Philadelphia sports as well. This is all we've known for the last 12 months or so, is just pain and suffering after making the postseason and making a deep run and then getting to the championship or getting close to a championship, and then it all falls apart. It's sad to see, but it's not surprising. This is what happens.
No.
And now to recap the race from today. So we saw 13 lead changes among 6 different drivers and 7 cautions. So once again, Martinsville didn't surpass the 10 cautions, but it did see the track's most cautions in the next-gen car era. Now, Ben, starting with you for this question, how satisfied were you with the short track package, and does it still need to be worked on?
Yeah, it's definitely an improvement. We saw passes for the lead, obviously. We saw some, good racing action all throughout the field. We still, like you mentioned, it doesn't feel like Martinsville to me. Like, we should not have a long green flag run like that to end the race. I feel like the Xfinity race is proof of that. I know we'll talk about that a lot more on Encore tomorrow. I don't think we should be aiming for that much chaos, but I think when you think of Martinsville, when you think of short track racing, you don't typically think of green flag runs that last that long to close the race out. So I think from an entertainment standpoint, I'm sure some fans would love to see a little bit more beating and banging than we saw today. But based on think of the first race we had with this package, with this next gen car, the spring race last year. I think absolutely we've come a long way from that race, but I think there's still some improvements that can be made going forward at the same time.
So I'm going to answer the second question first. Yes, it needs to be worked on. Absolutely. This is still not the Martinsville I know and love. However, we got more of the Martinsville that I know and love today. This felt more like how I'm used to Martinsville being and feeling, because you had side-by-side battles. You still had some bumping and banging out there, but you didn't have a bunch of wrecks, which I don't mind that. I thought this race was very great. I thought this was the best short track race of the Gen 7 era by a mile, maybe several miles. And that battle, not just a battle, but the battle throughout pretty much 80% of this race between Ryan Blaney and Denny Hamlin was so tense, so exciting to watch. And that was for a championship 4 position, essentially, for Denny Hamlin. And Blaney was essentially in on points, but he's still going for the win. Just so much fun to watch. And that's what Martinsville has been missing the past couple visits out there. And I'm glad it seems that Goodyear and the warmer weather, both of those, the tire Goodyear brought and then the weather today really helped make this race a bit better than it normally is, or recently has been. But improvements still need to be made. I hope NASCAR doesn't think, it's a home run, we don't have to do anything. They still need to do something. So we'll see what they do, if anything. But yeah, I'm satisfied with this race. Just needs more improvements overall, some tweaks.
Now, I've got a follow-up for you two. So yesterday's Xfinity race saw 15 cautions and tons of beating and banging, which is what some would consider traditional Martinsville. So does the Cup race need to be at that level? Ben, if you'd like to start.
Well, I think I just answered it. Obviously, I don't think we need to be aiming for that. That was, I think, especially towards the end with the 2 massive wrecks we saw, probably a step too far. But I would still say this. I think the Xfinity package is better. I think the Xfinity package as a whole has been better, not just on the short tracks, but I think, people joke about it on Twitter or X, all the time. Wherever we go, it seems like the Xfinity series should be considered the pinnacle of stock car racing, because that's where the best racing is. You don't see it in trucks. You don't see it in Cup. You see it in the Xfinity series. Maybe not where the most talent is, as again, yesterday was evidence of that. But, in terms of the on-track product, that's, I think, what we should be aiming for. I mean, people have been saying it, even going back 2 or 3 years, they were like, what are we doing with this next gen car? Let's just make the Xfinity car of a Gen 7 car and let's call it a day because the racing's so good. So, again, I think what we saw yesterday was, multiple steps too far from multiple different drivers in multiple different instances. But the products that we see when the racing is clean in that series, I think that's what you should be aiming for. That's the gold standard right now. And I think as much as the Cup Series has improved from when this next gen car was first introduced, they still have a long way to go to catch the Xfinity Series in terms of what that product can be going forward.
Yeah, I echo everything Ben just said. You don't need to have like a wreck fest or a bunch of wrecks to have a good race at a short track. I mean, you can have bumping and banging. You're going to have crashes at a short track. Like I said, I think today's race was perfectly acceptable. I've really enjoyed it. You had a lot of hard racing today, and we haven't seen that previously in the past couple Martinsville races with this new car. But like we still need to go a little bit further. You need to be able to pass a little easier. I think that's the main problem this Gen 7 car has, is that there's just so much dirty air and they're shifting, and that shouldn't be a problem on a short track.
Now, Grid Encore will recap the Xfinity Series race and the following drama, so be sure to subscribe to not miss tomorrow's fun show. Now, outside the playoffs, Eric Almirola finished second and was leading until Blaney caught him for the win. This comes after he announced he's retiring and coming home with Stewart-Haas Racing best season finish. So, Alex, with Phoenix approaching, what stands out from Stewart-Haas Racing's 2023 season?
Their social media presence celebrating Kevin Harvick's final season is the only highlight I can probably justifiably say about Stewart-Haas Racing's final season. But in all seriousness, you could point out Eric Almirola had a solid run today. Chase Briscoe had a solid run today as well. But I mean, other than that, not much. I mean, Kevin Harvick almost won Phoenix in the spring. Ryan Preece had that crazy flip at Daytona, if that's a moment you want to highlight. But just not a great season for Stewart-Haas Racing. It's one to forget. I mean, they're going to go winless this year. I highly doubt they're going to come through and upset the championship 4 at Phoenix. So not great. And then their lineup next year isn't too promising, in my opinion, without Kevin Harvick and Eric Almirola. They're two experienced drivers. I don't know. Just very disappointing for Stewart-Haas Racing.
Yeah, I do want to give a call to Ryan Preece, though. He won an ARCA West race at Sonoma in June, and he won the modified race earlier this weekend at Martinsville. So it hasn't been the season that he would have wanted on the Cup side, but at least one of their drivers getting to taste victory lane in some sort of way in 2023. But, I don't have too much to add to what Alex said. Obviously, Kevin Harvick's come close a couple of times. Thought he came close to Talladega a few weeks ago until he got disqualified. So he has certainly still been a solid driver this year for Stewart-Haas Racing. When you look past his performance, obviously, for all credit to Eric Almirola, a great result today, but he hasn't had the season he would have liked. Chase Briscoe, likewise, Ryan Preece certainly as well. It's been kind of a foreign concept to see all of Stewart-Haas struggling this much, but there's not really too much you can say about this season other than Kevin Harvick, and I guess now as well, Eric Almirola getting their retirement tour send-offs, if you will. We'll see. I would not be surprised at all if we see Eric back in some sort of part-time capacity, especially in Xfinity or trucks next year, doing something in this sport. I know he just wants to spend more time with his family, but doesn't want to completely give up racing entirely just yet. But it's a shame that they couldn't have gone out on a higher note than they have this year. And it's been difficult to watch. But I will say this though: if anybody can break the trend of the championship 4 winner has to win the finale to win the championship, Phoenix is, I don't even think it's an argument. I think it's Kevin Harvick's best track based on the results that he's had, particularly in his time with Stewart-Haas Racing. What a mic drop that would be if Kevin Harvick does what he came so close to doing in the spring race and wins the season finale at Phoenix next weekend. What a mic drop that would be for Kevin Harvick and that 14.
That'd be so cool.
Definitely. And here's a shout out to Todd Gilliland for finishing in the top 10, and only 12 cars finished on the lead lap. Now, Chase Elliott was not on the lead lap, and the 9 team is now out of the Owners' Championship. Chase is trying not to go winless this year. Since the current playoff system, the winner has been a playoff driver. Now, is Chase going to be winless in 2023, and do you anticipate a new crew chief, especially after the Watkins Glen incident? Ben, what do you think?
Well, before I answer the question, I just want to say I'll come at it from a fan perspective here. I follow the Owners' Championship. I think the Owners' Championship matters, and I've got to say I was kind of disappointed when Dale Jr. went off on it on his podcast saying, we don't care. Let's just save it for the banquet at the end of the year. I was kind of disappointed when Dave Moody went off on that. I can't remember if that was earlier this week or a couple of weeks ago, saying that, it's interesting to look at for some people, but it's confusing as heck. And, maybe we even need to go so far as getting rid of it. I like the Owners' Championship. I think in the rare instances when something happens like this, when teams are forced to use multiple drivers, it still gives the owners and it still gives the fans of the team. And I know that's been a talking point this week as well. Fans being invested. Jeff Gordon was even saying this. If you wanted to go the Hendrick Motorsports route, wanting to see fans invested in the teams, not just the drivers as individuals. I think the Owners' Championship gives them something to root for in that sense. So I have thoroughly enjoyed seeing the 9 team on this journey. It's a shame for them that they're not going to have a shot at it next weekend at Phoenix, although Chase Elliott did make things interesting getting up there and leading some laps today. But I think the Owners' Championship is important. I think it matters, and I want to make sure we get that point very, very clear here. Now, talking about Chase specifically in the season that he's had, obviously, with the injury and the suspension, it's been a very up and down year for that team, and they really haven't been able to get into a groove, so to speak, to find their footing and have some consistency to work with. I don't know that you can say a new crew chief is definitely necessary if they go winless this year, because obviously what happened this year is not the norm, and we can't expect that to be a regular occurrence for the number 9 team, which has championship pedigree and championship history behind it. I wouldn't put it past Hendrick. They've changed crew chiefs before. Think back to that 2011 season where they worked some crew chief magic, shuffling their crew chiefs around with everybody other than the 48 team. So I wouldn't say, it's something that we have zero chance of seeing, but I'm not going to anticipate it either. I do think they go winless this year. I don't see that 9 team, especially now that they're out of the Owners' Championship fight. I think the winner is more than likely going to be one of the 4 championship 4 drivers, or like we were just talking about, Kevin Harvick, who certainly is going to want to walk off victory like that. But in terms of Chase Elliott, I unfortunately for him see him finishing out this season winless.
Yeah, I don't see Chase winning, if only for the fact that 2 of his teammates are in the championship 4. I think you're going to be seeing him, if he is really strong, I think you're going to see him trying to play defense similar to how Blaney did for Logano last year at Phoenix. But the crew chief question is very interesting to me because I don't think they'll do it, but if they would, I would assume they would swap Gustafson and Blake Harris, who is on Alex Bowman's car, or they'll pull from Junior Motorsports from Xfinity. I don't know who they would grab from there. But they just got Blake Harris from Front Row for this year for Bowman, and that was working out at the start of the year, so I don't know if you'd want to take him away from Bowman. So, I mean, personally, I think I would wait another year because this is just a really weird year. Chase Elliott wasn't really himself. He got injured and then he got suspended and then just kind of making moves that wasn't really Chase Elliott-esque. And now, past few weeks during the playoffs, he's kind of been back to his usual self. It's like, this is the Chase Elliott I remember. He's starting to contend more often. I mean, today they had an interesting strategy, and as you mentioned, Ben, the owners' playoffs, that was a very interesting storyline today, and NBC didn't really talk about it, which I found kind of surprising, because they were leading the race, and if they did win, the 9 would have advanced to the owners' championship Final 4, but that wasn't mentioned on the broadcast, which did, like I said, surprised me. But answer the question, I personally wouldn't, but if they did, it wouldn't really surprise me. I'd just be curious to see who they would put in instead of Gustafson.
And now that's all for NASCAR. Ben and Alex, thank you for your thoughts. I'll hand it over to Jackson to talk more about Supercars.
Thank you, Isha. I just want to say right now, if any of you guys have not seen in chat this replay from Surfers Paradise, oh my gosh, go watch it. Instant classic.
Crazy.
Super good show. Super good show. 131 points, the difference between Brody Kostecki and Shane Van Gisbergen as we go into this weekend at Gold Coast. 120 is the maximum one can gain from each, 120 is the maximum one can gain in each race next week. 150 for the win. That being said, last place earns 30. Kostecki pushed Reynolds hard into making a mistake or pushing him wide. Never happened. One of the craziest battles for the win in recent Supercars history. That being said, SVG finished 5th place. Kobe, Joe, if Brody finishes 6th place in both of these Adelaide races, he wins the championship regardless of how Van Gisbergen does Is this championship battle still up for grabs, or does Brody have one hand on the championship?
Well, Jackson, I think when you look at Brody Kostecki, if he continues to do what he's been doing, I think Brody can easily go home and take the championship, but it's definitely not over yet. All it takes is one standing start going wrong, one first lap crash, something happened in the race, and then Brody Kostecki will be in a lot of trouble. But we've seen Brody rise and meet the moment, have some really good consistent runs. So I think Brody just really needs to keep doing what he's doing, and he can go home as a Repco Supercars champion, but never count out Shane Van Gisbergen at all, because she can capitalize on any mistake that Brody Kostecki makes. And at the end of the season, depending on what the final points tally is, Shane Van Gisbergen could very well lose his championship because he was disqualified from the very first race of the season on the streets of Newcastle. That would be really crazy if that's how it turns out.
Yeah, this championship, far from over. I agree with it, Kobe. One of the big things, I've just been very impressed with how Brody Kostecki seems to always be able to bounce back. After race 25, I mentioned here on the Saturday show that right now, Shane Van Gisbergen, he could potentially reduce that deficit to under 100 points, which will be very key. Brody Kostecki came back, pole, ran a great race, really in contention for the win just about all race long. One of the greatest races I think we've seen in Surfers Paradise in quite some time. And one of the big things I feel, Brody Kostecki, that team, they have the confidence that they could race with Triple Eight. They could bring the fight to them. And there's only 2 more races left to do it. I think overall, Brody Kostecki and that entire Embers team has to feel like they are the favorites.
Almost a universal agreement here that this championship fight is not over. Something that has sparked some controversy, though, is these closing laps. We had a move from our leader, David Reynolds, missed the chicane that made up turns 1 and 2 of the track. Some say it extended his lead. That being said, Kostecki was back on his bumper quickly and basically was with him all the way to the end of the race. Some thought it was an advantage. Some wondered if it would be a lasting advantage. Joe, do we think this was something that Reynolds benefited from, or something that race control should have punished him for?
I honestly think when it came to this, I felt race control probably should have looked at it a little bit more, because one of the big things, it seemed like Reynolds was not entering that chicane that great, and I thought he was going to have to try to really hard defend Brody Kostecki leading into that first corner, because that was one of the things I was thinking was, okay, Brody Kostecki, he's going to be right there, and we just saw David Reynolds. It seems like as soon as he knew I'm a little bit of trouble, I'm just going to duck into the escape route, and as long as, it looks like I didn't get a lasting advantage, I was not going to get much in trouble. So overall, I felt like I don't blame the team for saying, hey, there should have been something called on David Reynolds doing that. As you mentioned, Jackson, though, we did see essentially the battle between the two heat up, but I think that was a big missed opportunity for Brody Kostecki to try to get him entering that corner.
Yeah, for sure. And kudos to Brody for putting the pressure there and forcing David Reynolds to make a mistake there. To be honest, when I saw this move, I was thinking, oh my goodness, they're gonna have to make a call on this, and then they're gonna upset a lot of people, because it was such a great race. Actually, you saw 2 great races this weekend on the Gold Coast. That was a great battle between Reynolds and Kostecki there at the end. Honestly, I have a feeling if that would have happened maybe earlier in the race, we probably would have seen a penalty, but I have a feeling Supercars race control didn't want to, make a controversy even bigger by overturning David Reynolds' win and giving it to Brody Kostecki there. And Adam Limmery says that Surfers Paradise always provides excitement in the Repco Supercars Championship. By the way, what are your thoughts on Bathurst opening the 2024 season? Well, I'm sure anytime you get to a race at Mount Panorama is really exciting, but whenever you're doing, an event that's not the Bathurst 1000, the Bathurst 12 hours, something like that, it doesn't have the same feel to it as running the 1000 kilometer event versus, the races in the sprint format. So I'm actually not really a fan of having a second Bathurst race weekend, but I guess they need to look for a track to fill a spot on the calendar with the cancellation of Newcastle.
It's pulling something from the NASCAR book, right? Because you want to open on a big, very important track, and for NASCAR, we start with Daytona and then we go back in the summer and have a race. And I'm happy that we're not opening with 1,000 because I think it should always kind of be in that same time of year. But I think it totally changes how we approach that race, and seeing a sprint race there, I think is going to be something really, really exciting. Yeah, Joe, what do you think?
I mean, it's very similar to a NASCAR move where it feels like, okay, we know there's a discussion in NASCAR about, 2 tracks a season. And I think when it comes to the Supercar series, they're looking at this. I'll also say similar to IndyCar as well, too, with the Indianapolis road course being twice. I think it's a big thing for the Supercar series to try to have the number of races. But still, I just feel like it's exciting. Don't get me wrong. We're going to Bathurst. Great way to open the season. It's not exactly the Bathurst 1000. It's the sprint race. We'll see how it goes. We do know this is sort of something to fill in the schedule. So I say if it works, okay, that's great. But hopefully we can have Newcastle back because that's a beautiful street course and
yeah,
a lot of great racing over there.
Last talking point here, gentlemen, and we got to talk about this because we had a very, very scary moment during the dash to the finish. James Goldberg, guy who could have been in contention for the podium, spun and stopped outside of the turns 1 and 2 chicane. Tried to get back into the race maybe a little bit too early, grabbed a gear, spun the car around right into Scott Pye, who was completely blind to what was going on until literally like half a second of colliding with him. Pye managed to somehow, some way get out of the way, but unfortunately did clip the wall. That was the day done for him. The big one, no penalty for Goldberg, and Pye said, or Golding, excuse me, and Pye said, one of the dumbest race drivers I've come across, according to Speed Cafe. Guys, considering no penalty, does Supercars maybe look back and evaluate some improvements in case of something like this happening again?
Well, number one, I have no idea how Scott Pye didn't absolutely destroy James Golden there, because that was like a split-second decision for him to veer off and miss it. That would have been a very nasty shunt. Really, really glad we didn't see that. And number two, I still have no idea what James Golden was thinking there. I'm still relatively new to Supercars, so I'm not sure if they have spotters there, but James Golden certainly needed to have a spotter, someone on the radio there, be like, just sit there, just hold the brake and just sit there. There was, with cars that were coming, there was just no reason for him to, spin around that fast, because that was a complete danger. I mean, it's a danger anyway, just having a car, just sitting in a track like that, but he made it much worse by just spinning around when cars were coming around that blind corner. So I think it was a very lucky escape there. And I was actually surprised there was not a penalty on James Golden there. I think Supercars missed a mark there, and he should have absolutely been penalized, because that was a dangerous race move. And I really do feel like they should go back to the drawing board and evaluate some improvements they can make here.
Yeah, I feel there should have been some sort of penalty there. And I was starting to wonder, okay, did they not throw a penalty? Because maybe this is something the officials felt like maybe we could do better. Because I felt as soon as that car had spun and came to a stop, they should have right away started, okay, slowing the field down or something, because this isn't a track like Bathurst where you got grass to try to flick around. If your rear tires get a little bit in the grass, you can still keep going. There's a concrete wall, so you only had one way to go, and you got cars coming. I felt they should have been a lot more faster when it came to throwing that yellow. But this is something I think maybe Supercars will look at, okay, something we can improve on going forward. Overall, though, should it have been a penalty? I would say yeah, because we do not want another driver to try to do something like that. Because like you said, Kobe, that was something I just was bracing for that impact when I saw what was coming, and amazed that Scott was able to avoid it. But that ruined his race completely into the concrete wall. Car would just not go. Changed the entire finish of the race. So
simple thing is the fact that Golding basically ruined Scott Pye's race is he's lucky that's the worst damage done to that, because things could have been so much worse. But I mean, the fact is that's Scott Pye's day done, and there should be a penalty for that. But let's hope that there's changes for that next weekend in Adelaide, when we're hopefully going to see a very, very epic battle for the championship. In the World Rally Championship, though, Ben, I think we have a new champion.
We do. although it's the same guy that won the championship last year. Kalle Rovanpera is now a two-time WRC champion. Once Elfyn Evans crashed out, he had it wrapped up, coming home second place in the Central European Rally. Rovanpera took it easy after Saturday and got 8th in the power stage. Last year, he became the youngest WRC champion at 22 years and 1 day. His second championship comes at 23 years and 29 days. Before Rovanpera, Colin McRae was the youngest champion at 27 years old, so demolishing that record was Kalle Rovanpera. Jackson, Joe, is Rovanpera setting up to be the next Sebastian Loeb or Sebastian Ogier and dominate WRC and become an honorary Sebastian, I guess you could say?
It's for sure not being named Sebastian doesn't help, but him being Finnish, I think, makes up for that. But I mean, I think what really separates Rovanpera from all these other guys we're talking about, both the Sebs, is just how early this guy is getting a go on and just starting to collect these trophies. And, you know, I think he's a guy that we clearly doesn't have any intentions of going anywhere, is already in top flight gear with Toyota. I think this is a guy that could debatably go beyond the two Sebs and could truly be an all-timer. I really do think so, Joe.
Yeah, he is doing this at a much faster rate compared to the two Sebastians. They were much older, late 20s, early 30s, I believe. And what he is doing with the setup of Toyota Gazoo Racing, they are the most dominant team right now. I feel it is very hard to beat them. Elfyn Evans put on a heck of a fight, but Kalle Rovanpera, he is just on another level, and he's really learned, I think, from his early on mistakes, where we saw 2 years ago, he was leading the points for the first time, goes out the next race, stage 1, crashes out, lost it to Sebastian Ogier. What he's learned, I think, from Ogier, he's some of the best rally racers in Toyota Gazoo Racing, has really helped him out. And overall, I think if he continues to stay in World Rally Champion long term, he is going to potentially be beating those records set by Sebastian Loeb and Sebastian Ogier.
Well, guys, let's talk about Terry Neuville. He earned his second win of the year, tying Elfyn Evans and Oitanic for the second most wins this season. He still has a shot at second place in the championship, as he's 7 points behind Evans. However, now that Rovanpera has clinched first place, Toyota Gazoo Racing will likely focus on clinching second. So, Joe, we'll go to you first for this one. Do you believe Neuville is the favorite or the underdog for second place at Rally Japan?
I think he's the underdog, even though he is consistently up towards the front. Mistakes here and there that seem to cost him some races. And the Toyota Gazoo team, they already got the championship wrapped up. They really want to get a 1-2 finish. That's something I think Elfyn Evans, after this race weekend, he wants to come back strong. He's going to be hard to beat. I think you're going to be seeing essentially Terry Neuville. He's going to put on an effort, but Elfyn Evans, I think, is going to outperform him.
Yeah, I think we got to do it from a team perspective, right? And we've seen how much Toyota has dominated this year, and as much success as Neuville has had, I don't think his team really has the same level of bolstering in teammates that, you know, Toyota has. And I think you got to consider Thierry as the underdog for this race.
And Oitanic was third, Sebastian Ogier fourth in the Central European Rally. The rally was held in Bavaria in Germany. Now, Germany's been without an F1 race for a while now. They do have Formula E and now WRC, which will be back next year. So, Jackson, here's an interesting schedule thought here. Along with Rally Poland, more European stops by WRC, 13 rallies next year in 2024, plus rumors of WRC wanting to race in the United States in the future. Mexico's not on the calendar for next year either. What's your take on the first Central European Rally, and would a stop in the United States be possible to expand the season to 14 in 2025?
I think the concept of just going around numerous countries in one single rally is something that's really, really cool. I think some people would argue that it's good to kind of have it separated and do a Rally Germany or a rally for an Eastern Europe rally. But I genuinely think it was a really, really cool idea. And, you know, I think it's something that deserves to stay in the calendar. When we're talking about the actual schedule for next year, how much can we really call it the World Rally Championship when there's so many continents and parts of the world that we're missing out on? Mexico is a really big bummer for me. I've always loved that race. It would have been really cool to see New Zealand back, or maybe a return to Australia. but it's awesome that we have Japan back. It's so awesome that we're consistently getting Kenya back. I really do hope we can either get Mexico or something back in North America. There were talks earlier this year about potentially in the Tennessee area getting a tarmac rally. And yeah, I think it would be fantastic for us to have some kind of North American race, hopefully in the US for 2025.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing too, Jackson, that World Rally Championship, granted, we know it's primarily based in Europe. So many rally rounds in Europe. Excited to see Poland be included in there. We know, of course, Julia, our colleague in the Poland area. One of the big things, I feel this calendar, it's improving year after year. I feel World Rally Championship, it seemed to really have gone from something where it was very popular in the 70s, the 90s. It started really picking up in the United States as well. And now I think it's starting to get that momentum again. And then adding Kenya, Japan. Mexico has been a very popular rally stop. Now see on the calendar, we love to see a stop in North America and especially in the United States. I think what the rumors are about them looking at the Tennessee area, I think that'll be a lot of fun. Of course, one of the big things I think with World Rally Championship in general is just putting together an event where you're closing public roads. Granted, we're talking rural areas, so probably rural Tennessee. Still, it's going to be a big logistical effort to do that. And I feel compared to some of the European countries or other countries that they're willing to do this, it's always a little bit, I think, more tricky here in the United States to close public roads for any motorsport event.
All right, some interesting calendar thoughts. We'll leave it there. Joe, I'm going to turn it over to you. I understand, speaking of crowning champions, we have a new champion for the grid ranking for 2023.
We do. We have today, grid ranking, a brand new world champion was crowned, Max Verstappen. He has clinched the 2023 grid ranking, the 7th annual this season, and he becomes the first racer to lead every week of the grid ranking, second Formula One driver overall, joining Lewis Hamilton in 2020. So overall, big one. Formula One now ties MotoGP with 2 grid ranking world championships. However, MotoGP only has one rider with Marc Marquez in 2018 and 2019, where Formula One has Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen. He is the second youngest grid ranking world champion at 26 years old. And one of the big things, Marc Marquez was 25 years old when he did this. He was 26 in his second world championship, but Max Verstappen just a little younger compared to Marc Marquez when he won his championship. I will bring everybody in online because one of the big things, some interesting facts looking at the 2017 grid ranking, all past grid ranking champions has finished in that year except Max Verstappen, Sebastian Ogier. Of course, we didn't score World Rally Championship, but when you look at Max Verstappen and the stats he has, Max Verstappen, the 5 drivers in the 2017 grid ranking, Lewis Hamilton, Valtteri Bottas, Sebastian Ogier, Vettel, Daniel Ricciardo, and Kimi Räikkönen. Now, for reference, one of the big things, Max Verstappen, you compare him to Michael Schumacher in 2004 with Ferrari and Lewis Hamilton in 2019. Schumacher, 18 races, 13 wins, that's 72%. Lewis Hamilton, 21 races, 11 wins, 52%. Max Verstappen, 18 races so far, 15 wins at 83% winning percentages. Podium finishes, Schumacher 2004, 83%. Lewis Hamilton 2019, 80%. Max Verstappen, 94%. Clearly just dominating on a new level that we haven't seen in Formula One before. You look at the points finishes, Max Verstappen, 100 points so far compared to Lewis Hamilton, who did 100 points in 21 races. Max Verstappen, a little longer schedule, see if we could do that. And then, of course, Schumacher, 88%, because he had one finish outside the points and one DNF. Lewis Hamilton's worst finish in 2019 was 9th. And right now, Verstappen's worst finish is 5th place. So, Isha, starting with you, how impressive is seeing such a dominant season in modern motorsports, which seems to be more focused on closer racing and parity among the teams?
Joe, I've got to say it's very, very impressive. As you mentioned, modern motorsports, they've been focusing more on closer racing and parity among the teams, and I'm all for that. Seeing the closer racing and seeing real competitions happen and races, it's definitely more interesting. But looking at Max Verstappen's dominant season, it's just, even if you root for another team or even if you don't like Red Bull in particular, seeing his dominant season, you just can't think of anything else but awe for Max Verstappen and just recognize how impressive this feat is. So, while I personally would like to see more closer racing, which I'm hoping for in the next season, I've just got to hand it to Max Verstappen and congratulate him for putting up such a dominant performance this whole season.
I think it's really interesting that with Formula One specifically, all the money that goes into it, the millions upon millions of dollars, that you still get teams, like one single team, to dominate in this way, especially right now with how Red Bull is dominating. It's just really interesting because you would think with all the money that all these teams have that it would be a bit closer, but it's just not like that. And you look at IndyCar as well. I mean, Alex Palou did something kind of similar, not nearly in the same way as Max Verstappen's just winning nearly every single race. But I mean, even in that, all the cars are very equal. But Palou would manage to pull that off as well over there. But with Max Verstappen, these cars are so technical and there's so much money going into them. I've always found it just very interesting with F1 how there's always a driver or a team that's just so dominant. But now, Max Verstappen is just a whole other level. It's very impressive.
Whoops. I think it's important to realize, Alex and company, that yes, we have had teams running away with the championship a lot more in the past 2 years, but we've had so much more people finishing on the podium, which is exactly what this intended. I feel like overall we've had a fairly competitive on-track package with F1, and you would hope that, you would have more fighting up front. And I think all we can really do right now is hope that in the next couple of years, Red Bull doesn't just run away with it with the next couple of years. Although, as much as Adrian Newey is dominating, it's hard for me to argue that's not going to happen. I think one thing's for certain. It sucks as a fan right now to see one guy win every single race, but 5-10 years on, we're going to look back at this and be like, this is something cool. This is something absolutely awesome that we're going to be able to say that we got to experience. Ben.
You're right, Jackson. But in the moment, in the here and the now, it's very, very frustrating. And that's not to take anything away from Max Verstappen or from Red Bull, but this just feels different for some reason. Like we've seen, like Lewis Hamilton did this in the beginning of this turbo hybrid era, but I feel like at least he had Nico Rosberg, and Rosberg even won a championship. And then Ferrari started flexing their muscles a little bit. If I still believe if certain things had gone differently, Sebastian Vettel could be a 6-time world champion. I think he let 2017 get away from him. I think he let 2018 get away from him. Michael Schumacher even had Rubens Barrichello to a certain extent. I know he was on the podium every race in 2002. I know he won something ridiculous, like 12 of the first 13 and 4 or something like that. And Max has won 14 of the last 15 here. But, the season was just so perfectly encapsulated today with that first corner. And Sergio Perez and the conversations that we were having going into this year is, can Checo take the fight to Max? Can he truly be that Nico Rosberg and be somebody who, in a year where we know this car is going to dominate and win almost every single race, can he truly challenge Max Verstappen, who's shaping up to end up being one of the greatest of all time by the time he steps away and retires? Can he fight for the world championship? And after a couple of races, he won 2 of the first 5 races this year. I think it's easy to forget that. We thought we might be seeing that. And then Max went on his run, and just all throughout the year, particularly when we got into the summer months, I know he's still second in a championship. He might not be for much longer. Lewis Hamilton's coming, and if he hadn't been disqualified, they'd be about even from the Dakota race here. The points that he lost from that. There's just, and I told you guys backstage before we came on, the last several years, as I continue to get more disillusioned with the playoff format and what's happening in NASCAR and the direction that sport has been heading, I've really found myself much more invested in Formula One just from a fan's perspective. Of course, I still follow NASCAR, still commentate on it for this program and everything, but just thinking back to the last several years, if there's a NASCAR and F1 race going head to head, most times I'm going to pick the F1 race. That's just where I am in terms of my interest right now. As soon as the first corner happened, I had the F1 race on my laptop on in the background, but I'm the guy that has anti-playoff activist in my Twitter bio. And I was solely focused on the Martinsville race today because at least there are some storylines there and it's not a foregone conclusion who's going to win. I mean, Max has already clinched the championship. He's, won almost every race except for Singapore since, May? I mean, it's just very frustrating to watch that as a viewer. But again, at the end of the day, like you mentioned, Jackson, we are going to look back on this and look at him as one of the greatest of all time. Look at this as one of the greatest seasons of all time. But in the moment, it is incredibly frustrating to watch. And you hope that going into 2024, but you could see Mercedes and Ferrari, maybe even McLaren, maybe even Aston Martin can recapture that magic they had at the start of a year and challenge Red Bull, because the sport has a lot of momentum right now, particularly here in the United States, the boom and the growth that it's seen over the last few years here in this country. If it's a foregone conclusion, if you know who's going to win almost every weekend, what's the point in watching? And I think a lot of newer fans in particular are going to be asking that question as this dominance continues.
And I think that's what's really kind of almost humiliating for Formula One, where in the year where it seems like we have the most eyes on this sport, we have just a year where one driver has just ran away with it all. And that being said, it's still awesome to see like random people who you would never expect be like, oh, that's Max Verstappen. But it's just, I wish the on-track product would be so much better.
Imagine if 2021 was your first season as an F1 fan.
And for so many people, it was.
How incredible that was. And I know Abu Dhabi got very messy at the end and kind of put a damper on things. But the battle that we saw between Lewis and Max all year, and you get invested in that, you watch that, you think this must be what this sport is. And the last 2 years, and this year in particular, I mean, you find out that that's not the reality. And I think that's, if you're a newer fan and you don't have the historical context that we all have here, I think that's got to be very frustrating.
Yeah, definitely very, very frustrating, Ben. I think you've all pretty much summarized what I wanted to say, so I don't really have much to add. But I definitely want to tip my hat to Max Verstappen, Red Bull, for the incredible season that they've had. But like you guys were saying, from a viewer standpoint, is extremely frustrating to try to watch these Formula One races. And I'll be honest, when I come on these shows to talk about Formula One, I read a bunch of articles and look at the highlights package because I don't even see. It's not even worth it to wake up early to watch these races. Because watch them live, because I already know who's going to win. It's going to be Max Verstappen in 2021 when we had the epic championship battle between Hamilton and Verstappen. That was the first time I actually saw the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix live, because I'm typically still asleep at that time because I'm a night owl. I was very invested in Formula One in 2021. I mean, I'm still invested in it, but obviously not as much. But like you guys were saying, looking into the future, hopefully we can get back into a better state of parity where it won't be Red Bull running away with maybe we can get Mercedes back up there, Ferrari. Hopefully McLaren can do something, because it seems like they have a great thing going with them. And like you were saying also about Aston Martin, maybe they can rediscover that early season magic, because they've been absolutely nowhere in the second half of the season. I missed the times, when we had a Pierre Gasly winning the Italian Grand Prix, when you had Esteban Ocon winning his first race, when you saw Daniel Ricciardo and a McLaren winning at Monza, those type of races where you get an unexpected race winner.
I'll say this before we move on to the rest of our grid ranking stuff, but I think Formula One has a very big opportunity here for 2025 to make some big changes before we get to those next big set of reg changes in 2026. And I'm not saying, oh, let's just throw away the next couple of seasons and get hyped for 2026, but it's almost interesting, right? When we have cars that were purposely built to have closer wheel-to-wheel racing, and we've had this level of dominance. And you've got to give your hands off to Adrian Newey, who's, found the secret sauce. But it's sad that in the past couple of years, it's just been the team that kind of finds the key to good pace early, just runs away with it.
Something interesting, because we talk about dominant drivers. A question from the chat room: do you think Max's season was way more impressive than Shane Van Gisbergen's 2022 season, or just slightly?
That's a Joe and Kobe question.
I would say this. Last year, Shane Van Gisbergen over 19 wins in the Supercar series was very dominant. And I kept raising the question: is the competition just dropping the ball on Triple Eight Racing Shane Van Gisbergen? And it's starting to make me wonder: do you feel the F1 teams really drop the ball and bring in a competitive car this year and just enable Red Bull to just run away with it? Because I feel like this year has just been, no matter where Verstappen is, he's going to put himself in the top 5 or the podium.
I'll tell you what, it might be a mentality of, excuse me, it might be a mentality of, okay, if Red Bull's already getting this championship, let's just give up. I don't want to say give up, but let's pump the brakes on development for this year and focus on making a better car for next year. And I think a lot of teams this year are kind of putting their chips in that basket because they're realizing just how much of a dynasty Red Bull could be here for the rest of this kind of regulation era. So I am hoping that the rest of these teams really step up to Red Bull. But again, we're just gonna have to wait until Bahrain next year.
Yeah, well, and again, talking about it feeling different than it's felt. I mean, we saw Sebastian Vettel win 4 straight championships with Red Bull, and Red Bull win 4 straight constructors championships with him. But people forget, like 2010 was an amazing championship battle. 2012 was an amazing
2012,
battle.
fantastic.
You had 7 winners in the first 7 races. 7 different winners in the first 7 races in 2012. 8 total that season. Pastor Maldonado won a race in the Williams, for crying out loud. To this day, Williams' only victory, I believe, since 2004. I mean, that's the kind of parity I want to get back to. I understand what makes those seasons so special and so magical is that, that's not the norm, but they don't happen all the time. But when they do, I mean, it is a much better feeling just watching it as a viewer, watching it as a fan, that that there are 3, 4, maybe 5 different teams that have 2 drivers that could win on any given Sunday, depending on the track conditions, depending on which track suits which car the best. And here we are in 2023, and we get this. And again, Singapore being the lone Achilles heel for Red Bull and for Max Verstappen, the winner every other week, the last 15 races, has been a foregone conclusion as soon as you enter the track for FP1 on Friday.
One of the big things I feel this year, we've seen Max Verstappen dominant in F1. You look at MotoGP, Ducati just super dominant. It's all Ducati riders are in that championship battle. IndyCar, Alex Palou, what an amazing effort. I just feel like some years you're just going to have it where there's going to be some more dominant performances compared to other years like 2020, where we had so many different lead changes in the grid ranking. Just seemed, granted, the pandemic made it a lot more crazy. That season, I think it was still one of the most closest seasons, where this year there's just some drivers on a new level. And I think looking back, everyone's going to be saying, hey, do you remember Max Verstappen? And especially when he's on his way out, like if he's retiring, people are going to talk about 2023. Taking a look at the rest of the grid ranking, of course, Max Verstappen has the grid ranking all wrapped up. Alex Palou clinched second place because with Brod Kosecki, he is unable to get around Palou. Still a lot of battling all over. William Byron fell to 12, so it doesn't appear he's going to make the top 10, while Nick Cassidy made the top 10. So the first time we might have 2 Formula E drivers in the top 10. And Fernando Alonso, with all his struggles, he fallen all the way down to essentially 35th. Potentially, he could fall further down and out of the grid ranking. Now, the grid ranking might be all wrapped up, but one of the big things, of course, we still have the Grid Endurance Performance Index. They were not racing this weekend, so week 30 is out. And next weekend, Brandon Hartley, he is trying to win the Grid Endurance Performance Index World Championship. Of course, Matt White will have a report on the standings for entering the next race weekend for the Grid Endurance Performance Index Wednesday on Grid Tonight with Kobe. I will throw it to Jackson for our one shining moment.
Thank you, Joe. We had a lot of racing this weekend. Some of it boring, some of it really, really fun. Let's talk about the fun stuff. Go ahead and share a comment if you have a shining moment yourself, and we'll talk about it with you. Isha, starting with you, what do we got?
So for my shining moment, I had a 3-way tie. I was thinking about it before the show, but I think I'm going to go with a McLaren pick. So obviously I'm going to pull from Formula One as I almost always do. I'm going to say how Lando Norris qualified for P19 and then drove his way up to 5th place, which I think was really interesting to watch. And I think it's a bit of a testament as well to the upgrades that McLaren has brought in the second half of the season. And it's also a sign, I hope, of the surprises that they have yet to bring in the upcoming season. So that's going to be my shining moment.
So I gave Ryan Blaney my shiny moment last week, but I have to again. I have to. Because Ryan Blaney was the most aggressive I think I've ever seen him be. And I have watched him drive a cup car. I was at his very first start, is what I'm trying to say, at Kansas in 2014. And I've just watched his whole career. He's always been a guy who gets pushed around very easily, but not today. He was racing against Denny Hamlin so aggressively and was bumping him back and moving people out of the way. You normally don't see Ryan Blaney do that, and he really needed to do that, and I think that's a big reason he won today. But I will give a joke shining moment. I almost said this is my only one, but I'm like, I have to give it to Ryan Blaney. A joke shining moment, I'm going to give it to Martin Truex Jr., because he can now go have fun and go fishing on his boat. I'm so happy for Martin. He's done with the playoffs this year. He can go enjoy his boat now.
My one shining moment comes from MotoGP, and that has to be the last 10 laps of the MotoGP race between Pecco Bagnaia, Brad Binder, and Jorge Martin. The three of them, we had so many lead changes as they were trying to conserve their tires. The racing between the three of them, at one point knee contact between Pecco Bagnaia and Brad Binder for position. This was phenomenal racing. We haven't seen that much in MotoGP considering how dominant it has been essentially this season with Ducati dominating. So overall, I got to say, MotoGP, they got my one shining moment.
And this may surprise our viewers, but I actually have a shining moment that actually has something to do with the on-track action we saw this weekend. Yeah, my one shining moment has got to be everything we saw this weekend, Surfers Paradise on the Gold Coast. I thought the Supercars race weekend was absolutely fantastic. I love this Surfers Paradise street circuit, my favorite track on the Supercars schedule. We saw a lot of great moments, and Jackson already mentioned it. You know, first race of the weekend, that's an instant Supercars classic, a race that people will be talking about for years to come. That was an epic battle between Cam Waters and Shane Van Gisbergen, and then David Reynolds getting his first Supercars win in 5 years. It's been a long time since we've seen Reynolds on the top step of the podium. And this is also a sentimental win for David Reynolds because he's going to be leaving this Penrite Racing team at the end of the year. He's going to be replaced by Richie Stanaway, and Reynolds is going to be going to the Team 18 team. So it was nice to see David Reynolds and Penrite get one more win together at the very end. Overall, just a fun weekend of racing on the Gold Coast.
Well, sorry. No, Ben, go. Sorry. No. Go.
Okay, sounds good. All right. Well, like we mentioned at the beginning of the show, or during the NASCAR segment, rather, it has not been a great year for Stewart Haas Racing. But I want to give a shout out to a few of their drivers today, especially, like I mentioned, looking past Kevin Harvick. Harvick hasn't had a terrible year. I know he hasn't won a race, but certainly hasn't been the send-off season that he would have liked. But the three others, Eric Almirola, Chase Briscoe, and Ryan Preece, it has certainly not been the year, so they've wanted either, and even more so with how far back they've been in the standings. Eric Almirola finished second today. If the race had been 30 laps shorter, we'd be talking about him being a Cup Series race winner and what's we now know going to be his final full-time Cup Series season. Chase Briscoe, I feel like he didn't get enough recognition for this. Fourth today, a great top 5 run for that 14 team. And like I mentioned a little bit earlier as well, Ryan Preece visiting Victory Lane in Martinsville this weekend in the modified race. That has to be a huge confidence momentum boost for all three of those drivers going into Phoenix, coming off of some positive runs this weekend. That's my one shining moment for a team that, quite frankly, hasn't had a lot of them in this 2023 season.
Got ourselves a couple of shining moments in chat here from Adam. One shining moment, David Reynolds snaps 5-year winless streak and wins one on the Gold Coast. Kobe was just talking about that. Got to agree. Matthew Barreau, Chris Bell back in it. How about that? Regular season champ MTJ is out. 2 great ones. And I'm going to go with Adam here with the Gold Coast race. I'm going to change it, though, and kind of throw an oddball because, yes, his race was still over, but I think the fact that Scott Pye was able to avoid that car on track and just keep it from total catastrophe is a fantastic bit of driving. And again, I think just absolutely goes to show that supercar drivers are a different breed, man. That is all for us for Shining Moment. And Joe, we have a champion.
Yeah, we got a champion. We still got some more championships to decide later on. MotoGP, the Supercar Series, of course, the NASCAR Cup Series. So we got plenty to cover. So be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any of our upcoming programs, including Grid Encore tomorrow, where they're going to be recapping the Xfinity Series race at Martinsville, plus a lot more. Ben and Brandon on the air. Then Grid Tonight, Kobe, Matt, they'll be on the air to discuss the Grid Endurance Performance Index, all the latest news across the motorsports world. And then we'll do this all over again next weekend with Grid Live. If you want to invest in us, hit the Patreon, subscribe to us. You get some stickers with the Grid Network logo on it. Well, thank you on the air as well, too, like we do for Colin the Show, Mark, Robin, David, and Matthew. And if you like what you saw today, also consider YouTube Super Chat. If you're not watching us live, hit the thanks button or buy me a coffee. One of the big things, of course, we all do this for fun. If you want to contribute to a member of the Grid Network team, just put their name in the contribution so that way they could thank you on the air. For everyone here, Ben, Isha, Kobe, Jackson, and Alex, I'm Joe. Thank you for watching today's little bit extended version of Grid Live Wrap-Up. We'll see you next time. Thank you for watching us right here on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe and check out some of our other videos, including Life on the Grid, where we interview folks from the motorsports industry. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.